Someone summed up the story of the Bible this way: Jesus is coming, Jesus has come, Jesus is coming again. Today we are living in that last stage. We're waiting for Jesus to come again. We're waiting for the end of time, for Judgment Day, waiting for the time that we will go to heaven or to hell. Now, many want to know when Jesus is coming. Predictions have been made. All have been wrong. We simply don't know when Jesus is coming again. As we saw in a previous sermon, in Matthew chapter 24, verse 36, Jesus says, "No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." He then, a little later, says, "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him." Many want to know how Jesus is coming. They say, well, we don't know when he's coming, but how is he coming? Well, Scripture does have something to say on this, but much has been misunderstood or mistaught. Preachers talk about the rapture, the 1,000-year reign, and Armageddon. Well, many of these doctrines are more imagination than fact. Others are the result of interpreting symbolic language literally. I believe that the second coming of Jesus will be much different than many people think. But when and how Jesus is coming again are not the most important questions. The real question we need to ask: how do we prepare for Jesus' coming? What do we do until he comes? Now, the first century Christians expected Jesus to come soon. In fact, some stopped working, they became idle. And so Paul, in the letter to the Thessalonians, the second letter to the Thessalonians, encourages them to get back to work, not to be idle. Scripture says that we must do more than sit and wait for the coming of Jesus. How shall we live until Jesus comes? We've been studying the parables of Jesus, and this morning we look at two of the parables that Matthew recorded. These give valuable instructions on how the Christian should live in anticipation of Christ's second coming. Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 30. We will read first through verse 13. "At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight the cry rang out, 'Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him.' Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out.' 'No,' they replied, 'there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves.' But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the others also came. 'Sir, sir,' they said, 'open the door for us.' But he replied, 'I tell you the truth, I don't know you. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour.'" The message of the parable of the maidens, the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, is watch. Watch. Jesus in Matthew 24 had taught about the fall of Jerusalem and his second coming. Matthew chapter 24, verses 45 through 51, records the parable of the faithful and unfaithful servants. We studied that last Sunday morning. That stresses the importance of faithfulness in service. The parable of the wise and foolish maidens emphasizes the importance of making preparation for Christ's second coming. Whereas the wicked servant failed to reckon with an early return of the master, these foolish maidens failed to reckon with the problem of a long delay. This is their only fault. Well, William Barclay, in commenting on this parable, says, this parable is certainly not a made-up story. It could have happened at any time in a Palestinian village. The Jewish wedding customs were quite different from ours. The whole village turned out to accompany the couple to their new home. And they would usually go by the longest route possible in order that as many people as possible might give their good wishes. The couple did not go away on a honeymoon. They stayed at home and hosted an open house for a week. They were treated and even addressed as a prince and princess. This was the gladdest week of their lives. Now, chosen friends were admitted to the festivities. The foolish virgins missed not only the wedding, but the joyous wedding feast. Well, middle-class families in Palestine still celebrate weddings in somewhat the same way they did in the days of Jesus, the way he described it centuries ago. And there are probably some who still miss out on the wedding feast. Some years ago, J. Alexander Findley told of what he observed during a trip to Palestine. When we were approaching the gates of a town, I caught a sight of 10 maidens gaily clad and playing some kind of musical instrument as they danced along the road in front of our car. When I asked what they were doing, my guide told me that they were going to keep the bride company till her bridegroom arrived. I asked him if there was any chance of seeing the wedding, but he shook his head, saying in effect, it might be tonight or tomorrow night or in a fortnight's time. Nobody ever knows for certain. Then he went on to explain that one of the great things to do if you could at a middle-class wedding in Palestine was to catch the bridal party napping. So the bridegroom comes unexpectedly, and sometimes in the middle of the night, when the bridegroom has once arrived and the door has been shut, latecomers to the ceremony are not admitted. Well, as Jesus tells this parable, there are the 5 virgins, the 5 wise virgins, the 5 foolish virgins. They are all there. They are to accompany the bridal party in some way. They have to provide their own lights, no street lights at that time. And the picture is that they have lamps. Now, these could have been the little oil lamps that were used in the home. They burned olive oil. The wise virgins took extra oil. They knew it might be a long time. The foolish virgins did not. Others picture this as they had torches, but at any rate, because the bridegroom was so long in coming, they were getting low on oil. Their lamps or torches were about to go out. The point of the parable is not whether the wise virgins should have shared their oil with foolish virgins. If they'd done so, all the lights might have gone out. That would not have done. The parable is saying something, I think, about individual responsibility. It was wise to be prepared. It was unwise not to be prepared. And the point is, in verse 13, watch. Make preparations so that you can watch. As we await the coming of Jesus, just stop for a moment. Did you give any thought yesterday that yesterday Jesus might have come? When was the last time you thought Jesus might come today? Unlike the first century Christians, we don't give a whole lot of thought to the second coming of Jesus. But this parable still has a message for us. We need to always be watching. Yes, it's been a long time, and Jesus hasn't come. But as Peter addresses in his letter, just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't happen. Yes, Jesus is coming, and we need to keep watch. We don't know when it will be. And then there is a second parable we consider this morning, the parable of the talents, beginning with verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. When he went on his journey, Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with the 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. The master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him, and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The message, the one-word message of the parable of the talents is work. The parable of the virgins, watch. The parable of the talents, work. Here was a master. He was going to go on a journey, and he was going to be away for a while, a long while. And he brought in some servants. He brought in 3 that are mentioned here in Matthew. And he gave them different amounts of money. Jack Lewis said, the parable of the talents continues the theme of watchfulness, but stresses the need of activity while watching. The prudent use their time wisely in serving God. Under the influence of this parable, talent has come to mean ability. But Matthew's readers would not have gotten this meaning, for the biblical word was a weight whose value depended upon whether copper, silver, or gold was being weighed. What the master did was give money. A talent was a sum of money. And it come to represent, by the time Jesus told this parable, it come to represent about $1,000 in silver. And so, huge amounts of money were given. They were given to the slaves so that they could go and make more money. We notice that it said the master gave to each according to his ability. He knew these men. He knew what to expect of them, what he believed they could do in making more money with the money he gave to them. And sure enough, the one to whom he gave the 5 talents, made 5 more. The one he gave the 2 talents to made 2 more. Our attention quite often centers on that 1 talent man. Now this man was given a good bit of money. Even today, if you're given $1,000, it's not pocket change. He was given this amount of money, but he was different than the other 2. He was fearful. He didn't think well of his master, and so he went and hid the money. Now that was accepted practice in those days for security. You didn't have a lot of banks, safe places to put money, and so quite often money was buried for safekeeping. The master returns, and the servants come in. One who had been given 5 said, I made 5 more. He hears, well done, good and faithful servant. Joy, participate in my happiness. Same thing with the one who received the 2 talents of silver. He doubled it. Well done, good and faithful servant. But that 1 talent man comes in, said, I was afraid. Besides all that, I knew that you were just a hard man. So I just buried your talent. He is rebuked sternly and punished by the master. Said the least you could have done was take it to the bank so that I could have made some interest. While the Jews were not to charge interest to each other, they certainly could do it and did charge interest to outsiders. What is the point of this parable? Again, we need to work while we wait for Jesus. We don't need to be idle. We sometimes sing the hymn, we'll work till Jesus comes. While we are waiting for the return of Jesus, we don't know when it will be. We must not simply sit and wait. We must be active. We must be doing the Lord's work. Here are a few observations from the parable. Use what you have. The slaves were given a great deal of money, as I said. We must use what God has given us. Now, as I've said, we've come to often use the parable to talk about our abilities, our talents, in the way we use the English word. And that is a good application. We need to use what God has given us. He's given us abilities. He's given us time. And yes, He has given some of us money. We should determine what our talent is. Harold Taylor told about a man who had made a great deal of money. And he had contributed that money to the Lord's work. Well, this man wanted to quit his profession and preach full time. And Taylor told him his talent was making money to give to the Lord. He didn't want him to quit making money and go into full-time preaching. Well, we must do also what we can. Use what we have. We need to do what we can. We especially should do what we do best. We have different abilities when it comes to evangelism, encouragement, visiting, benevolence, and yes, making and giving money. And as a side note, we need to remember, all of us have different talents, but the work of the Lord can use all of these talents, can use all of us. We also see from this parable there are no excuses for not using our talents. There's no excuse for not working for the Lord. The excuses of that 1 talent man were not accepted by his master. We also see from the parable that faithful service will be rewarded. Now, work for the Lord is not to earn salvation, but it is necessary to receive the gift of salvation. From these 2 parables, we know Jesus is coming again. We need to be ready. To do so, we must watch and work. One day, a mother was headed up the stairs with a basket containing the last load of folded clothes. She was herding her 3 little ones in front of her for bedtime. Her eldest child, Peggy, who was then in kindergarten, picked that moment to begin one of those questions that seem to intrigue all children at some time. Mommy, she asked, if it were the end of the world and everyone was getting ready to die, the mother stopped, shifted the basket of clothes on her hip, and said an ultra-quick prayer for wisdom to answer this question. Yes, the mother prodded her daughter. The little girl finished her theological inquiry. If the end of the world came, would you have to take your library books back? That young lady didn't want to leave any unfinished business in her life. But what about us? Do we have some unfinished business in our lives that needs to be taken care of? Is there anything about which you would be embarrassed or ashamed if the bridegroom were to come today? Do you have any unfinished spiritual business? Anything you need to do for the Lord? Are you a Christian? Preparation for Christ's coming removes the fear of His coming. When Mary, Queen of Orange, was about to die, her chaplain wished to console her with some reading from Scripture. He was concerned whether she was prepared for this journey. She replied, "I have not left the matter to this hour." She felt prepared. An old Scotsman expressed the same sense of preparedness as he faced eternity. As a friend offered some sayings at the end of his life, he replied, "I thatched my house when the weather was warm." He felt he was ready. A doctor related a story about seeing a friend who was in the last day of his life. When the doctor came to his bedside, the man reached out and grasped his hand. "Oh, John," he whispered, "I'm so sick." When his head dropped back and they thought he was gone. But after a moment, he opened his eyes again. "John, is that you?" The doctor replied, "Yes, it's me." The dying man said, My, I'm so disappointed. I was expecting to see the Lord, and all I saw was you." He was ready. Ready. He was waiting to meet his Lord. You know, we tend to wait till the last minute. It could be cramming for tests. It could be sermon preparation. Not that I know anyone that's guilty of that except me. Well, anyway, the problem of waiting until the last minute, spiritually, is that we don't know when the last minute will be. Jesus makes it very clear. We do not know when he will return. He says, "I don't know." And so he says, watch and work. It pays to be prepared. It pays to have a sense of urgency that says it might be at any moment. It could be. The National Football League did a study on scoring in the NFL and discovered that in the last 2 minutes of the first half and the final 2 minutes in the second, more points are scored than in any other 20 minutes of the football game. We work harder under pressure. But you know, in life, we don't know when our 2-minute warning will be. We might die, or Jesus might come soon. Being prepared takes the fear out of when. The year was 1780. In New England, there was an eerie, dark day that frightened many people. At noon, it was as dark as early night. The birds, as confused as the people, sang a final twilight song and fluttered off into the evening dusk. The cows came meandering home from pasture, and the chickens came home to roost. Religious men fell on their knees and begged a final blessing before the end came. In Hartford, Connecticut, the state legislature was in session, and someone moved adjournment, thinking the day of judgment had come. But then a legislator stood up and said, "I'm against adjournment. The day of judgment either is approaching or it is not. If it is not, there is no cause for adjournment. If it is, I choose to be found doing my duty. I wish, therefore, that candles be brought." The legislature approved his request. Have we been faithful in our service to God and to our fellow man? If Jesus were to come today, would he find us at our post? Would we be watching and waiting? Some folks in Iowa read in the weather forecast column of the local newspaper some time back that it said this. It says, there is a 90% chance of tomorrow. Somebody had left something out. There's a 90% chance of tomorrow. Well, probably the chances are better than that, but who knows? Let's be prepared. Our death might come, and yes, the Lord might come. Let's encourage each other to watch and work till Jesus comes. As Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, therefore encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing.